Hi, I'm Len from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Isaak Tsalicoglou. Based in Athens, Isaak, and I'm quoting him here, writes about all aspects of organizations turning their knowledge about markets, customers, and technology into a competitive advantage through the judicious use of technology, vigorous collaboration across functions and locations, and an entrepreneurial mindset, but also writes about how hype, dogmatism, agency issues, culture clash, and misaligned incentives prevent organizations from doing so. You can follow him on LinkedIn, where he's easy to find. And you can check out his latest book, Phoenix Product Codex, Develop and Deploy a REST API for Product Data Management with Elixir and Phoenix. In the book, Isaak provides readers with, and I'm quoting him again, a thrilling real-world journey of building a production-ready REST API for product data management using Elixir and Phoenix, born from the requirements of a family-run business facing a government mandate for electronic invoicing. In this interview, we're going to talk about Isaac's background and career. We're going to talk about his book, and we'll talk a little bit about his journey as a self-published author. So, Isaak, thank you very much for being on the Leanpub podcast once again.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
So normally we ask people to give their kind of bio in the first part of the interview, but you've done that. You've done that once before. So I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of an update about what changes have been happening in your career and in your life in the last few months this year.
Yeah, sure. So mechanical engineer by training, as I've mentioned before, but really a computer geek from a very young age, Linux enthusiast since 1997. And what really colored my experience, no matter where I've worked, with probably one exception, is that I like to tinker with computers and with open source software. And the source of this book is actually my father's business, which is a trading business in Greece, trading industrial equipment. It's a business I grew up in since I was a kid. I've mentioned also I remember in the front matter that where I'm sitting now used to be the first office of the business, way back when in the 80s and early 90s. And what happened is when I returned to Greece 5.5 years ago, and I went back into a small family business after more than a decade in corporate, I got frustrated with how we're doing things manually or with Excel sheets and Word documents, copying things around. And that was because, of course, the crisis hit Greece like an octopus on the rocks, as I like to say. And in the years of the crisis, between 2009 and 2016, 17, maybe even a bit later, things had atrophied in the family business. So whatever whatever needed to be done was done in the simplest way possible. And then when I returned in 2020 and I dove back into the business, there were already murmurs, even during the lockdowns, about the government instituting electronic invoicing. So they delayed it, and we slept on it. And then suddenly there was a Cambrian explosion of providers of software as a service for invoicing that were certified by the government. But also the government made it possible to access with a REST API the data you have from the tax authorities. And at some point they said, okay, now it's done. It's a final deadline, October 2021, I think. Yeah, I think 2021, they will start with electronic invoicing. And I faced a situation where we had basically no codification of sales items. Like every time you had to make an offer, you were copying and pasting from previous offers, similar materials, adapting, and there was no way to track what you sell, how much of what you sell, in which category. So there was no possibility of data analysis. And at the time, I was still not aware of Elixir. So I had done some Python in the past years ago. So I got back into Python and I built a very simple REST API to issue product codes. And that's actually, those are the origins of this book. It's the re-implementation in Elixir and Phoenix framework, which is a framework for creating REST APIs websites with Elixir. A re-implementation of what has already been running for years at the family business. Now, you ask me what happened over the last months is I took over my father's business, continued with a new brand, and I'm continuing mostly the digitalization. So I'm taking over all the customer base, the suppliers, and I'm continuing the digitalization that brought really good results to make it more efficient. And given that there's a new website, there are new processes that people have gotten accustomed to, but I want to make them even simpler because I want to do what we have been doing for 30 years, but make it more adaptable to the new generation of engineers who call me up from the field and they send me messages on Viber, or they will check the website, or they are more likely to request a quotation online. I thought, well, it's time to go away from the scrappy little suite of APIs I built in Python way back when in 2021 and 2022, and start implementing things in Elixir and Phoenix, which I absolutely love. I love the ecosystem, I love the language, I love the community. I'm also getting involved in the Greek Elixir community now that we're trying to build. And let's write this thing, which is proven. It's a real world project with actual constraints, with actual requirements. It's all very clear. Instead of doing what we did in Northwell Elixir Trader, which was basically almost like a random walk through or fumbling through implementing something that is already fixed, but it's a toy database, toy data set. Let's actually implement a real world API using best practices, which is nothing new. I mean, there are tons of books on doing this. There are many people who have thousands of years of experience more than me, but the special part of this book is that it doesn't follow the happy path only. So we'll try things out and see where it fails to understand how Phoenix works, to understand the quirkiness, or maybe sometimes documentation is very good generally of Elixir and Phoenix, but it leaves some things up for interpretation. It's not always full of guides. And let's implement this and put into production. And that's a big focus. That it's a production. It's gonna be a production ready REST API with everything that you find in APIs that people develop for a living in big companies, like with a rate limiting and authentication, authorization, and caching for responses, and content management and localization. Basically, pulling out all the stops to showcase what's possible and how it is possible with Elixir and Phoenix.
Yeah, thanks very much for that really great intro and explanation of what you've been up to and the origins of this book in Northwind Elixir Traders and real world applications. One thing we've been sort of charting, and this is kind of like motivated reasoning on our part, given so many Leanpub books are technology books. But one thing we've been sort of promoters of is the idea that people who formerly would have thought, you know what, I'm not a technical person, I'm an MBA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just going to hire the programmers and forget about the computer stuff as much as I can. People are learning that's a big mistake. And I mean, in the past, it kind of used to be true because the technology was so inscrutable, but that's changing now, partly thanks to books like yours and authors like you, and people realizing, like through various movements like domain-driven design and stuff like that. It's like business leaders, if they want to succeed, it's 2025. You have to understand the technology. It doesn't mean you need to have to understand it at the level of the technologist, but like if you read books like this, you will be a better leader in your business on the financial side as well. And so with that in mind, I was wondering if you could talk, let's say you're talking to a group, you're in a room full of MBAs, freshly minted, they're all applying for jobs at big companies, and you need to explain to them what a REST API is and how it can transform their business.
Yeah, with REST API, the whole idea is we're using the HTTP protocol to talk to computers using, let's say we establish a contract. We say, if you send me this data or make a request to give you this kind of data, I will give you the data in a specific form. It can be JSON, it can be plain text, like in Phoenix Product Codex. Something that people will not expect is that we're also implementing plain text responses. It's not only JSON where you determine, the angle brackets and the structure, the complicated. We implement plain text because when you're in a small business, you're likely using Excel or LibreOffice Calc, mostly Excel, but I'm a big fan of open source. And therefore, you want to make requests to your API and have it return text in the cell, error codes, numbers, strings. So my advice to people who are more business-minded and have not dabbled technology, it's the best time to get into it. You don't need to vibe code. It's always best if you know your domain. And I'm not vibe coding with LLMs, but for sure I use LLMs to have a discussion of, what do you think about this? Is the explanation good? What is missing from the reader's perspective? Is it standard practice? You have the ability nowadays to scale up your understanding so fast. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to do this. Like, I do this now because I love doing it. I love programming. I have a small business that I want to build my own tools for. But it also means that down the road, when the time comes, if the time comes, the business keeps growing and I have new requirements, I already have a mental model of how the business process runs, and being able to convey and to convert the business requirements into how they're implemented, even if you are not the one implementing it, builds better software, whether you are building it or whether you're working with others. Because the most difficult thing I find in software development, also in product development in general, if you're a product manager, is to synchronize your brain with a project manager, with a front-end developer, with a development engineer, with a management, and you need to be able to work at the interface. In fact, that's the preface of the book. That's how it opens, that I once worked for, notably I say not with, a CEO who was not the best guy ever, but he was saying something very true, that the magic happens at the interfaces. So here we are attacking the interfaces to see anything that needs to be understood has to be understood in a way that will stay with us. So we also don't copy paste from the documentation. We try to figure things out as we go, and if we backtrack, it's totally fine. Like with Northland Elixir traders, you learn through the unhappy path. And so my advice is, yes, okay, with LLMs you can do many things. You can even do requirements analysis, and you can have a chat. It's like a rubber ducking, but with something that is giving you coherent response instead of the silence. But it's immensely valuable, and there has never been a better time for somebody who's more of a business minded and maybe a bit afraid of tech to step into this world. And that's what the book aimed, my books actually, the technical books, that's what they aim to convey. They aim to tell you, you can do this. You don't need to become an expert programmer, but understanding this will make your business and your software better.
Yeah, let me ask you a very specific question. So we sell things online, digital products, and sometimes we have to apply sales taxes to those. What that works is, as a small business, or as any business, you collect the sales tax, and then you need to remit the sales tax to the relevant government for whom you collected that tax. So there's one particular country a little while ago that changed the way they do things. So the way you now sort of report, you pay it one way, but you have to report it separately. And the way you report it is you give them basically a spreadsheet formatted in a very specific way with like pretty important financial data regarding your business and your taxes in there. And then you have to, there was a Cambrian explosion of middle persons that basically this government said, we don't want you to give it the information directly to us. We want you to give it to this middle person in a spreadsheet, and then they'll send it to us. Now, this is better than other systems, but it's obviously not ideal. What would be ideal is if the government had set up something so that my business could just do some magical programming and have it automatically submit that information to that government. So would an REST API be able to solve that problem?
Yes, and that's a whole idea here in Greece. I'm not gonna say that everything in Greece is going well. It's a country that has its problems. Historical things are not gonna be. Things are somewhat massively different to what they used to be during the crisis and before, but they're also different in ways that are sometimes positive, sometimes negative. However, one thing that it is amazing, and I was amazed when I returned from Switzerland of all places, which is super efficient, amazingly friendly to business and so on, is that regardless of whether it was because of COVID or not, I returned, I repatriated, and I did everything by email and through gov.gr, which is the unified portal through which more and more services of the government are being offered digitally. Part of this has been what's called the My Data system, which is the electronic interface of the tax authorities. In the past in Greece, you used to queue for hours, go to like a bazaar in the center of Athens. I've been there to file taxes or to do something for social security and so on. And you had to wait in line, and you would reach the office number one. It's a meme in Greece. You would reach office number one, tell you, oh, you need a stamp from the third floor. You go to the third floor, you need a stamp from the first floor. Oh, you're late. Oh, you haven't filled this in. Total bureaucracy. And now this all has disappeared. And you do everything through REST APIs. And this means if I want now to pull the information about how my business is doing, I have an API key and I make a request to the government's My Data REST API, and I get back, these are the invoices that have been issued for your company. These are the infos that you have issued. And then I can use that and combine it with the data from my APIs and build my own view of how my business is doing. This is the primary example. Now, it's not always so nice. So I follow the forum of programmers, developers who deal with my data on LinkedIn, and they are pulling their hairs out because, of course, it's a government project and not everything is clearly documented. And for some reason, it returns XML and expects XML as a request. So I do not envy them. I never want to be in their position. I appreciate the work they do to make it work, but the idea is use as little as possible, keep it as simple as possible until things mature, because integrating with any API is a moving target. Tomorrow, maybe something breaks. Maybe the gateway is down. Happens sometimes, the reverse proxy. Get a 522, I think, gateway issue. So you need to, yes, digitalize, but keep in mind that the more you rely on those electronic systems, the more you're dependent on somebody else. So it's good to have control of the core of your data. That's why I never wanted to go to a third party to issue, I don't know, product codes, for example, because I need to mirror my own mentality for my portfolio, for my customers, for my needs. And I don't particularly want to just twiddle my thumbs until some government API or third-party API works. That's also motivation. It's a motivation of independence and frugality on my part.
Exactly. I mean, so the programming isn't just, I mean, often in people's minds, it's like providing apps or web services or something like that.
Mm.
It's like internally improving fundamentally the way your business
Yeah.
understands itself and communicates outside itself with the other systems that it needs to interact with. It's interesting, the image you had of, the kind of like, going to the first floor to get a step, the second floor reminded me of a big improvement that happened in Canadian life relatively recently. So it used to be that if you wanted to get your passport renewed, you had to go to some office downtown. Hopefully you're already in a city that has one of those offices. If you're not, you've got to take the day off of work and drive in. And it's just completely random. You show up, you're in a long queue, maybe outside the building. You finally get to the front of the queue when you get the privilege of tearing a little piece of paper off a roll, and it's got a number on it. And then you sit there and you watch these numbers be called, and it sort of lights up on a screen. And then hopefully you're not in the bathroom when your number comes up. And then you go, and then there's some incredibly bored bureaucrat who hates their life, who's just doing a repetitive process over and over and over again, so they can get to their pension as quickly as possible. Who sort of just sort of fills in some things and asks you some questions, and then what do? They pass the paper along to someone else, and hopefully 3 weeks later or a month later, with no mistakes, we get your document. Well, now I just went online and submitted a couple of photos online, and I got my passport within 2 weeks. And it's like the process is like far fewer errors, far fewer bored bureaucrats. Everything's just so much better. And it's interesting that, like, of course, yeah, there's going to be problems in government bureaucracy and blah, blah, blah. But like, I remember interviewing an author years ago who said he was a computer science professor, and he said, look, I don't think he brought this up, but you know how men's suits have buttons on the side of the arms, even if you can't open them? That's because surgeons used to need to open up their coats and roll up their hands so they could get in there and cut people open and stuff. But of course, they're operating with their suit coat on, so when they're done, they just, maybe wash off the blood a bit and roll their thing. So they're spreading disease and germs and stuff, the infection everywhere, right? So he said, basically, he was talking about Git and version control, and he said, with computers, we're basically still at the beginning of, like, discovering germ theory, right? And so version control was like washing your hands. Surgeons needed to learn to do that. It took a while, but once they learned it, oh my God, look at the statistics for surviving operations and health and life outcomes and stuff like that. And it's a very exciting thing that we're still I mean, computers have been around for 80 years, but like, we're still kind of at the beginning of this journey. And to see governments in countries like Canada and Greece making these changes, however halting and, whatever steps forward there are, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, is really just an amazing improvement to all our lives and our businesses as well.
But this is also how it always works with those systems, because you have to create a model for how an entire business with all its sectors operates. And I find it's unique, at least in my perception, in the software development industry. The platonic idealism of how things should be. It should return something simple. No, but you don't understand. You are working with a behemoth, which is called the government, that doesn't care that you only have service invoices, and that you only have, the other guy only has, I don't know, sells equipment and hardware, must also issue a delivery note. They have to have a system that caters to every single sector of the economy with every single regulation covered. The complexity is immense, and I find it's actually funny to see complaints of the people posting on the forum of the My Data developers. I understand it. It's frustrating to see that not everything works as expected. But if you were in the position of the developers who have to develop and take into account this whole universe of complexity that has also grown over the past 50 years as governments have grown and grown and grown, you would be in the same spot. And you're operating in a tiny part of this whole massive ecosystem, which is called the X economy, Greek economy, UK economy, Canadian economy. And you're alone looking at things from your own little corner, and you criticize that things are not being done perfectly. But that's exactly the task. I mean, the task is to harmonize and to establish something common across everyone that doesn't make imagine the UI to cater to every single company. If you believe you can make a better job than whoever is doing that job, then you should have that job. For sure they can get better, but we also have to accept that people who are operating those big systems, they have to tackle a lot of complexity, and that's a job actually. And I don't think that any LLM can take yet, I don't know if ever, into account the entire complexity that you have to tackle to model everything about an economy so that it's electronically doable with our REST API.
Well, that's interesting too, because that brings up, we're getting a little bit theoretical here, which is fine with me. But people often, if you come at things from an engineer's mindset, the one thing you often kind of discount or bracket or don't even include at all is interests. Like, why can't we do this or that? Why can't the government just do this or that? Because there's some very rich, powerful people who don't want that change, right? So an example would be, why can't, if I'm in the United States, for example, why can't I just go to a government portal? They have all my information already, most of my information already anyway. Why can't I just go to a portal and give them the information they don't have about my last year's finances and click a button and submit my taxes? Why do I have to go to pay some company a bunch of money to do all that, like stuff that I could do myself? Why is it so complex? It's so complex because those companies, believe it or not, are incredibly powerful, funnel money to politicians who then go to Washington, D.C. and say, no, we don't want to improve things. And so it's just another way of thinking. Like, when you think about, why can't the government do X, Y, and Z? It's because there's a lot of people who make money by getting in the way of having it properly.
I think it's the saying, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, because there is a lot of willingness to criticize how governments work. And I'm not a huge fan of government in general. I think government should be rather smaller than larger. But people criticize the government, and when you look into how they do their business daily, you realize they're not better than a government. They're not kidding. There are many companies where they are not that different to the people you mentioned, the bureaucrats who roll up, or who sit there and smoke a cigarette in the past. Because it used to be a bazaar. You have a ceiling of smoke at the top. It was, in 90s, for example, no smoking regulations, especially in Greece. Even if you had them, nobody would follow them. That's a key thrust of my writing is, if you are a small business, you only stand to gain from trying to digitalize your process, because in the process of re-evaluating, hey, why am I doing this even? Or the way I'm doing it, yes, it's fast. It's fast every time I do it, but over time, there's a lot of craft. And if I ever want to look back and see how I'm doing, do an analysis of what inventory items we sell, what do we stock, do all those things that people consider to be the privilege of big companies, like doing an ABC analysis of stocks and your inventory, or understanding how your pricing affects volume moved, which is an inaccurate analysis, but you can do it. Like, many things that for decades have been kept exclusive to companies that operate multinationally. Now that more people know more things, and more people have studied more MBAs, BBAs, and know how to use Excel and know how to use tools, you now have all that wealth of knowledge. And your task as a business owner is to take all that complexity, strip it away, and keep what works for your business and make it as simple as possible, and do not make it perfect. Satisfies. And you mentioned engineering. Engineers, we are satisficers. We need to take into account trade-offs and to see, okay, we're not going to tackle this. And this happens also in the books. Like, for example, I have a case now where I tried to centralize something, the software. I tried 3 different times. I spent 2 pages on it, or 3. And then I said, okay, let's backtrack. Let's strategically retreat. There's no point in trying to make it perfect. It's good enough for our uses. We don't try to make the platonic ideal of an API. Let's move on to more important things. And that dynamic reprioritization and being ready to adapt your requirements. I mean, if that's not the definition of agility, then I don't know what it is. And people talk a lot of, we've talked about this in the past, about my penchant for criticizing the agile industry, lean, and so on. That's the problem, that people take this as a gospel. And in the end, you have to understand your business, how you want to operate, set a North Star of how do you imagine operating your business. Like when I stepped into the family business, it took us 30 minutes to 1 hour to generate a new offer. As business grew in 2020, 2021, all the way through 2024, we had more and more requests. So how are you going to ever tackle so many new inquiries, even if not all of them turn into new orders? Well, you are forced, starting from the end, to begin with the end in mind, that you want to be able to leave work by a certain time. Excuse me. Leave work by a certain time, not spend your time in stupid, needlessly repetitive things. So you become like a public sector employee that we criticize so yearly. And we are done in 5 minutes. So now you can make an offer in 5 minutes. Pricing is done for you, or at least a starting point. Offer generation is done for you. The PDF is ready to download. There's a tracking code. And those improvements, they are small, and you don't need to revamp the entire universe. Just make little steps. Have the product vision in mind, as I say. Have a vision of your target state, and then start to build towards it, and make a couple of backtracks, discard something, improve something, but keep moving forward until you hit a point where you say, well, okay, fine. 5 minutes for a request for inquiry to turn into an offer. It's good enough. I don't need to bring it down to 2 minutes, because after a point, I'm not gaining much. So this is a critical work that needs to happen in every small business.
Yep.
Otherwise, we are hypocrites and we're criticizing others, but we're not doing what we're preaching.
Exactly. And that's very well said. And one of the interesting things that I think often, sort of us small business people can kind of lose sight of is the incredible advantage that we have of being the people who are doing the work and making the decisions about how the work is done as well, because at big companies, it doesn't work that way. And so, for example, one of the just universal kind of frustrations that consultants who are brought in to improve business processes have is that, I know I can improve this business process. I know I can improve this business fundamentally going forward, but it's going to involve a delay to the other things that people are working on now, because we have to divert their attention to changing the process as, from building the product or improving, getting it to do features if it's a software product or something like that. And in order to do that, you have to convince someone whose career's on the line with their decision that this is it's gonna slow things down in the short term, but it's gonna improve things in the long term. If you're running a small business, that's all up to you. And that's the great thing about it, right? So one of the things to look at is what processes can I improve? The ones you hate doing. Absolutely. Look at that first. Think about, do the fun thing. You can decide, what do I hate doing? Okay, I'm going to have to take a week, maybe even myself, to learn some programming or something like that. But if I can read one book and then spend a week reading a book and then spend a week improving my business and take away that thing that I hate, as you say, how much more, not only do I feel better about everything, not only is my business more efficient, but now I've got time to improve it.
Yes, and if you are a super tiny business already, you have stakeholders. You might not consider it, but you do have. For example, in the family business, initially, when I developed things, I developed them for myself because I was a primary consumer. But then I wanted to roll it out so that others can use it. I wanted to have a view that the accountant can see, to see the inventory without me making an Excel export and do this ping pong of, here, I printed out the inventory. Or the operations manager. She needed to be able to give a quotation on the phone if somebody requests something simple that doesn't need engineering consultancy. needed to be able to just pull a price or generate a quick offer or find information about the company. Or if you're generating we put labels on things we ship to give to freight forwarders, or we'll bring them to some company if it's close to Athens. Why make it difficult? For you, it can be difficult at the beginning because you're the consumer. You're willing to put up with nonsense that what other people would consider nonsense. So even if you're a tiny business of 5 people, which we were at the time, as soon as you step out of your nerd zone, where everything is kind of, you accept it because you don't want it to make it better, because you feel that it's detracting you from other things. As soon as you hit a person who is not technical, suddenly you have a stakeholder. Suddenly you are in the middle of change management, and you can either say, imperatorially, which I hate, is this how we work? Shut up and do it, which is disastrous for quality of work. Or you can sit down with a person, sit down with the accountant, ask him how he wants to look at things. You can have a stakeholder who is very resistant to change, like my father. My father is now 70. He was always an amazingly technologically progressive guy. Otherwise, I wouldn't be the computer geek I am. Like, I had a computer since I was 4. I was very lucky to have this. But as one grows, one gets used to things being done, and that's the way we do it. So even though it might be your father, your mother, your uncle, your whoever, the secretary, the operations manager, the accountant, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do change management. It's not done with PowerPoint slides. It's not done with lots of ceremony, but you still need to find a way to make it usable, to understand how to sit next to the user who is not you and shadow them and understand that, when she is clicking here, why is she clicking here? I never click here. Why is the first thing that comes to her mind or to his mind to click that, which doesn't give him what he expects? And once you step out of your own mind, you realize you do not tick like other people. If you want to make it usable across multiple roles in the business, even if it's a tiny business, you have to consider other people's analytical mindset, lack of knowledge or knowledge, what they've gotten used to from other apps, especially younger people. You expect them to go through a form with 1,000 things. No, you expect them to click here, click here, click here, and do it. And you can say, well, now you're becoming a front-end UI, UX developer. Let's not put labels on things. It's also not rocket science, brain surgery, whatever. It's understanding where people get stuck, listening to their feedback, and deciding how far you want to take it. You don't need to have a professional grade software as a service that you're going to sell to other people. But if you manage to make this change management smooth with its hiccups, in a few weeks, in our case, was a few weeks, because close proximity, small business means you can iterate super fast. And I had time at the time. I spent a full week developing the first version of the first API, and then another 2 weeks tweaking it based on feedback. We were in 1 month. Our process for quoting things, for invoice things, had changed drastically. And that's also part of my motivation why I'm not in corporate anymore, because I got tired of having to have a slide deck blessed by the head of this and head of that and the BU head of this and executive board member, because then I need to talk about how, this is good to do because it ties into the corporate strategy, which has a priority on digitalization. Like, oh my God, like, people are complaining for 10 years that this is stupid. Like, I had a process when I was at Hilti where people were basically high-paid people with 15 years of experience in materials management, logistics, for example, and they were just shuffling data back and forth between SAP forms. This is a total waste of potential and a source of human errors and a source of confusion and disagreements. We had a simple project where we said, before you hit SAP, let's make a super simple web UI that multiple roles can use. You iterate on the super user-friendly web UI between product manager, local product manager, regional product manager, logistics manager here. So 5 or 6 roles. And as things mature, then you can hit the behemoth, which is called SAP, and start copying into this horrible UI to set it in stone. And that, however, takes the willingness to listen to people, and people who are fighting in the trenches. Sorry, but they know the complexities of the role better than any CEO, BU head, and so on, because those people too, as they grew to be complacent with with how they used to do things in the past, they don't see a need to do things differently sometimes. Not all of them, but most of them, in my experience, do. They think, well, I struggled. Why shouldn't it have it easy? They don't think like this, but you can hear it you can read between the lines. Like, what's the problem? We used to do this 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I was a logistics manager. Now I'm a chief logistics, whatever. We used to do it like this. What are you complaining about? Are you a complainer? Then you get stamped as a difficult person to work with. I've seen this actually in businesses, and it's a pity, because only if you, especially if you're a huge company, seriously, huge companies waste immense amounts of money. Like the amounts of money wasted every time in a big corporation. I could run my business. I would not need to make any sales. I would basically live off of the money wasted and 10 times over. And it's a pity, because that's where you have the scale. But it becomes super powerful when you bring it down to a small company that needs to adapt to a fragmented environment. Like, for example, in Greece, we're not the only one who sells equipment of that kind. My company isn't either. So the way to compete is not by saying, oh, my product is best. I have the product is also good. It's also hard to find a path to the customer in a way that will make them more likely to choose you, or they will find the whole experience more frictionless.
Yeah, and just to like jump in there, I mean, to bring that to, like, or not bring it down, but to give a very practical example of the kind of thing we're talking about here, is if you're a small business owner, or part of a small business, and you learn the things in your book, for your books, for example, think about, for example, what do people have to email you about?
Yeah.
Imagine they didn't have to email you. Imagine they could sign in and get all the information they need themselves, right? So what's the status of my project? What's the code for the transaction number, or what have you? What's the charge gonna be if I do this or that? All these things people are emailing you. Are you sending out Excel spreadsheets to people? If you're sending out Excel spreadsheets to people, actually, you could probably take a week, learn this, take a week, build it, and then they could sign in, and they could securely, and they could then download the information that they need. Better for them, better for you, better for everybody. And so with that said, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the specific journey that you take people through in your latest book, Phoenix Product Codex. What's the business journey?
Yeah.
Not the programming, the business journey.
Yeah.
If that's
So the business journeys we start with. Yeah, it's important. In fact, that's how the book starts off. We start off with why this thing needs to exist and why it existed in the first place. The first Python version that has grown over 3 years as requirements shifted and eventually became something quite solid and works, but is not professional grade. We begin with the business context, and that's important. So the idea is, if you start reading Phoenix Product Codex, I'm not just saying, well, let's start, first install Elixir, the latest version, then install Phoenix. This is all, you can find like 1,000 places where that will tell you how to do this. But first, we need to establish why we have a complex thing we need to represent. So we go through saying, here's how it works, at least in my business. It's not all the businesses, but it's a way of thinking, is that you have suppliers who have product families who that actually are belonging to product categories, and you have a number per category, and then you have variants that the manufacturer ships. So then you need to think about how to split this in domains. Like there's the catalog domain, where it's what you offer, and there is the supply domain, which is what others give to you. Because, for example, you need to represent situations that arise, like we'll order a big bundle of things, filter elements, doesn't matter. We'll order them. They're available in kits of 7, 14, and then it goes up non-linearly up to crazy numbers. But then the equipment for which those spare parts are being sold sometimes has 4, sometimes has 7, other times has 14, and so on. So we will get a code from the manufacturer variant code that has, 56 items in it. And then we need to represent it in our system to kit it out, to make a kit of 7 or of 4. So there's a clear domain boundary between what comes into the business from the supplier side with their own codes, and how then internally we process it. We convert it to inventory items, or we convert it to sales items that each has a separate unique code with its description, in English. If it's a company that operates in English, can happen, but mostly it's in Greek. And then give it a price, link it to price changes, log pricing. So we start with this complexity first. And one of the first things that we talk, it's a big part of the beginning chapter, which of the first chapter, which is understanding the product, the business process context, is discussing taxonomy. I find this is a fascinating example because, like category theory, how do you put things in little boxes? Again, there are a few pages discussing what is a taxonomy, why there is no one taxonomy to rule them all, and what you need to take into account. Like as a business, you have a different intent to the supplier. The supplier, for example, looks at things usually from a very technical perspective. Like they might classify something as a dust filter polygonal, dust filter cylindrical. That's like navel gazing. That's for some reason that's how the supplier organizes it. Now you add another supplier who has a different classification. They might say dust filters for an application or for a range of applications. So your job as a company is to create a taxonomy, or one or two or three taxonomies, different taxonomies that can do 3 or 4 different things. Translate market needs or how people search to something they can find. Translate the structure of a portfolio to something that can be shown on a website or on a brochure. You have different things you need to do, and we don't shy away from doing that. Like it's not a business book, but it gives you an understanding of, if you're a programmer, for example, you will gain some value from understanding how a business analyst thinks. If you're a business analyst, you learn the complexities of an API, and the goal is to cover both ends of that end-to-end process.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and the book does a great job of it. And for anyone who's familiar with the previous book, Northwind Elixir Traders, this one is about a quarter of the length. But it's sort of one of the reasons it can be a quarter of the length is because of the work that you did producing the first book, and all the lessons learned, which is just amazing.
Well, so far, Len, to be honest, I think I was intending to make it up to 250 pages, but this is probably going to end up almost as long as Northwind Elixir Traders.
I missed that. Sorry. Yeah, the book is marked as done.
But that was my vision for it, to make it shorter. But it turns out that there's, even if you know the business requirements, even if the tag is clear and you know already things because you've read Northwind Elixir Traders, there is a whole lot of things to really dig deep into and take side quests and understand how their routers work or how testing works. Like, for example, we use the European Union's VS API, VIES, where you can send a tax ID of a company and they send you back the name and the address and so on. So you want to test this, let's do some testing. So we explore testing, and we need to mock the service. But then you need to also mock what happens if the service doesn't respond. Is my API responding the right way? So we go down those rabbit holes to the extent that is necessary to make this robust. It's not a book on testing or mocking APIs, but we go deep enough so that if you need to do it in the future, you have already planted the flag saying, okay, yeah, I've seen that before. Like, I need to mock an API. Let's figure this out. I know the library. I know what to search for. So it's a bit like it's like giving you an empty map from the business perspective and the technological perspective, and it goes as deep as it needs to go in some things, but it also plants some flags so that when you want to explore further, depending on your own needs and requirements in the future, you at least have the vocabulary and the notions in your mind to go and dig deeper. It's not a completionist book, but it will turn out, I expect to turn out 450 pages.
Okay.
Because it's huge. It's huge. It has so many things to do to make it production grade.
In the last part of these interviews, if the guest is a Leanpub author, I always like to ask them about their writing process. And I'm curious, has your writing process changed for this book from your previous books?
Radically so. First of all, it's faster because I use different tools. Like, I write in VS Code now, in Markdown, and then I copy paste it into the Leanpub online editor. But that's the technical part. What has mostly changed is that having made the experience of what it means to write a book as expansive as Northwind Elixir Traders, I have a better gut feeling of how to structure it, where to backtrack, what to not backtrack on, and this goes way faster. So even though it's going to end up to be a similar length to Northwind, like 500 pages, in Northwind 493, it goes way faster because you become better as you write in understanding the trade-off between going too deep or staying too shallow. And you basically get better as a product manager in prioritizing features. That's basically what it is in the end. It's becoming more clever in being agile and looking at your audience, and you also get to know the audience better. Like after the comments I received, the excellent comments on Northwind, I now know what people are looking for. I know what things they're struggling with. I go to very positive feedback generally, and a couple of things that this I don't understand. This is too much back and forth. So the first book was insanely difficult. I never expected to take one full year. This book will not take more than 6 months if I don't get bogged down with other work. And the next book, at some point, I think it will stabilize because you cannot get infinitely faster. This 1% improvement every day is bonk. It doesn't work that way. You have diminishing returns.
And are you going to increase the price as time goes on as well, and you add more content?
Yes, I do this. I find that what I really love about the Leanpub concept is that you allow people who want to support the author, want to support the publication of a book that they find the market needs or they need. They can support the creation of that artifact from early on. So my approach is always start off with a discount, especially for Elixir forum readers, 20%, 10%, 30%, depending on the price level in the beginning. And then as I add content, the price goes up. Because this also gives you a very strong incentive looking back that if you bet on a book, you will see the book. And if you are an early adopter, you are not part of the mass market. It's not punishing the mass market. It's rather incentivizing people to bet early on books that from an author who they know will deliver. And I think this also creates a positive feedback loop, given how crowdsourced things in the past have created quite a lot of disappointment. To bet on sources of material where you will get what's paid for, and you paid less for it, way less for it than what it will end up costing. And at the end, the price, if people are not so price sensitive, if it's a niche material and they really like it and they find value, they will pay the price you said, even as you increase. I increased the price of Northwind because I considered that the price was too low for what it is. And if you look back at it, it's like a $500 course condensed in a book because you come out super strong in both Elixir and Ecto. And now with this one, it will be the exact same thing because you start at the point and you could have just about spent 500, 1,000 or scoured the net, but you pay a tenth of the price, around the tenth of the price, to do things at your own pace and end up competent in something that is in my view a key skill. Like REST APIs, understanding how things work, it's only going to get more important. In fact, I have a first reader who already posted, are you also going to cover model context protocol, MCP, so that the API is consumable by AI agents? I said, well, I was not in the plan, but if you give me a source that I can read up on and see maybe write a short chapter on, here's what an MCP compatible API needs, and here's what we have. And these are the gaps. At least it gives you another milestone to move towards. And that's the approach. Like buy early, don't bet early. I don't like the betting metaphor because not betting. I don't like investing because you're not investing. You are benefiting from being an early adopter and you get a better price, and you were there early and you can give your feedback. That's the most, we talk about pricing, but the most important thing is if you read early and you send me a message, we'll have a chat like I did with Northwind, and your feedback will end up in the book most likely, especially if it's solid, well thought out, compatible with the book's vision. And I think that's a true strength of publishing with a Leanpub model.
Yeah,
you get better books.
No, that's just amazing. I mean, that's the perfect kind of approach to Leanpub that we encourage everyone to take. The last question, I'll ask you a version of the last question, which I've asked you a couple of times already, that I always like to ask is, when you're using Leanpub these days, is there any kind of dream feature that occurs to you, oh boy, like if we had endless money and resources, what would I love Leanpub to be able to provide to me as a self-published author or to my readers?
I would love a preview of the themes, because it's a bit of a hassle to change something on the theme to find a perfect font size or the font type and then generate, export, it doesn't work, and maybe a wider selection of fonts. Especially given that I was surprised to find that IBM Plex Mono, which I really like as the font, I used in Northwind, doesn't support Greek characters.
Oh.
So I had to backtrack and change it back to deja vu mono. But this is a nitpick. In the end, I think that the website is very text heavy, and I don't mind that because it's a website for people who write and read. But a bit more visual guidance would be certainly useful, or a dashboard. Like if you have, I tend up accessing the same links every few days. The Northwind royalties, the sales, the Phoenix Product Codex sales, overall sales, royalties, payment schedule, whatever. Maybe you need a dashboard where I can add links instead of having a drop down on my browser with
Right.
all the links that I access. This will be a more user-friendly view and things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We actually have had that request for a dashboard from a couple of authors recently, and it's interesting to see things getting to the point. I mean, that's particularly authors with more than one book. And one thing we actually don't have is just a chart of all your sales. Every book,
All this be.
it's a chart of sales, and you can go like last 30 days, last 3 months, lifetime. But we don't actually have an overall chart of like across all your books and courses and things like that, and bundles and what have you. So there's and when we actually are working on designing something like that right now. No promises about the timing or anything like that. But this dashboard idea is something that we're getting a little bit of religion on. And yeah, I take your point to heart about like, being more visual. We are very much a kind of like text, but like literally black and white text kind of. Me and Peter basically just that's how we're designed. And so it comes out of us that way, our information and things like that. And yeah, working on being more visual, working on having more color and things like that is definitely something that we know we need to work on. Isaac, thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening in Athens today to talk to us and to talk to me about your book, Phoenix Product Codex, Develop and Deploy a REST API for Product Data Management with Elixir and Phoenix. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.